My father-in-law looked down on me when I said I worked in construction, not realizing he was actually working for me. At 25, I started dating an amazing girl through a mutual acquaintance. We had been together for a year when she thought it was time for me to meet her parents. Her parents are project managers in the construction industry and work for the same company. I was a bit anxious to meet them, knowing they had a reputation for being protective and quite critical. My girlfriend spoke of her parents with much affection, but also with the caveat that they were naturally protective and somewhat traditional regarding the expectations for their children's partners. At 25 and immersed in the construction sector, as the leader of my own company, I understood the importance of first impressions, especially when it came to people who had a significant influence on the person I loved. The meeting started off well. We found common interests and shared anecdotes about our experiences. However, the atmosphere changed when my profession was mentioned. When I mentioned that I also worked in construction, my father-in-law immediately assumed I was a laborer, which I did not correct. My intention was clear. I wanted to be appreciated for who I am, not for my status or financial achievements. The conversation became tense when he asked more about my professional life, even touching on the topic of my salary. I replied that I earned $15 an hour, emphasizing that it was my passion for my work that guided my choices, not my position or salary. He showed some disdain, saying I wouldn't get far with that mentality before praising his daughter's career as a lawyer, noting that she earned twice as much as me, insinuating that I should be the one responsible for supporting the family. His tone was full of condescension, as if a man's worth was measured solely by his ability to financially support a household. My girlfriend, noticing my discomfort, intervened, firmly defending my career choice and criticizing his prejudices. Her stance touched me, strengthening my affection and respect for her. She asked him to stop the rude behavior. He laughed, and they then apologized, though without sincerity, admitting they had crossed the line. Despite the awkward apologies, the damage was done and the atmosphere remained tense. I kept my composure and changed the conversation to another topic. As we were leaving, he mentioned the possibility of us meeting in the construction field, given our common ground, with a smile. Even though the situation was an opportunity to reveal my true identity, I chose to remain silent for now, preferring to let things unfold naturally. I agreed, saying the construction world is small. Once in the car, she apologized for her father's behavior. I assured her that it didn't bother me. Then I took out my phone to reveal a surprising piece of information. From the beginning, I told my wife that her last name seemed familiar to me, and that's when I confirmed that her father worked at my company. My girlfriend, always eager to keep the peace, apologized several times for his behavior and asked me what I planned to do next. I reassured her, saying it was no problem at all, and that her father's contribution to my company only increased his value in my eyes. This simply meant that he was a valuable asset to me. A few days later, her father called, asking her to bring lunch to him at the construction site. She saw this as an opportunity to try to improve the situation and suggested I come along. When we mentioned that I was with her, his desire to see me added a layer of apprehension to my curiosity. Sensing her hesitation, I held her hand and reassured her with a smile, saying everything would be fine. Sitting at an outdoor table at the construction site, the wait for his arrival was full of anticipation. His offer to show me what he did as a project manager while giving me advice on how to succeed was ironically touching. I listened with respect, nodding at his experiences and obvious passion for his work. He spoke with such enthusiasm that it was impossible not to admire his dedication. As we were leaving, I expressed my gratitude for his sharing, praising his dedication and knowledge. His smile, directed at a young and ambitious person, marked the perfect moment to clarify things. My tone became more confident as I told him there had been a misunderstanding about my role in the construction industry. He looked at me, perplexed, and asked what I meant. I laughed nervously and confessed that I was the owner of the company he worked for. His initial confusion, followed by deep embarrassment, was palpable. His apologies were sincere, and I graciously accepted them, emphasizing the importance of not letting titles influence our relationships. His offer to make amends by inviting me more often and even for family vacations was an appreciated gesture. My girlfriend felt guilty, wondering if my intentions were to test his reactions. I reassured her, saying that what mattered most was getting to know each other beyond prejudices and positions. The situation strengthened our relationship, but she still struggles with the fact that her father changed his attitude towards me only because of my position. For me, what matters is that we can all move forward with authenticity and mutual respect. It's clear that the path won't be easy, but I believe this experience will help us build a more solid and true foundation for our relationship. After that day at the construction site, my father-in-law continued grappling with the fact that I was the owner of the company where he worked. The truth was that the idea seemed difficult for him to fully accept. Perhaps it was because it didn't align with what he had imagined of me, or because he was used to seeing the owners of large companies as distant and unattainable figures, different from the simple young man he had met as his daughter's boyfriend. In the beginning, he seemed hesitant. Although our conversations were cordial, there was a certain distance he maintained. It wasn't exactly hostility, but a mix of disbelief and a need to understand the new dynamic between us. He still saw me as the young man who, in his mind, earned $15 an hour, not as the businessman who led his team. Even so, I kept my attitude of respect and humility, always finding opportunities to create a comfortable environment for him. When he timidly suggested the possibility of accompanying me on some project visits, I did not hesitate to accept. I made a point of showing him not only the technical aspects of construction, which he already mastered, but also the nuances of the real estate sector, negotiation strategies, investment decisions, and the administrative side of the business. In the first few months, he seemed even more lost. Despite all his experience, the commercial side was uncharted territory for him. But he was genuinely interested, and his willingness to learn was something that surprised and inspired me. Over time, he began to accompany me regularly, absorbing every detail with the curiosity of a dedicated apprentice. During our visits, I made sure to ask for his opinion, highlighting his vast experience in managing projects at the construction site. He began to realize that his knowledge was valuable not only for day-to-day operations, but also for business decisions. He transitioned from being a simple employee executing orders to someone who actively contributed ideas and suggestions. Gradually, his view of me began to change. That young man he once looked at with disdain was slowly transforming into someone he could count on and even admire. As our professional relationship evolved, the personal side also transformed. We began to meet outside of work, whether for family lunches or casual meetups to discuss strategies and new projects. At a certain point, he started inviting me over without any specific reason, just to share stories of his youth, how he started in construction, and how he dreamed of one day having something of his own, though circumstances had never allowed it. One day, he asked me, almost as if he were apologizing, if I thought he could still learn about the real estate field and become someone useful to the company in that regard. In that question, I saw a sincerity and vulnerability I had never seen before. I told him that more than being useful, he was already a fundamental part of our growth, and that, with his experience, he could go far beyond what he imagined. From then on, I began teaching him more in depth about the real estate market, from identifying good opportunities to final negotiations with investors. Years went by, and the company grew exponentially. We expanded into new markets, increased our team, and became a reference in the construction and real estate sectors. And throughout this process, my father-in-law was by my side, not just as an employee or advisor, but as a true partner. He learned to see the market as I did, and in many moments, his suggestions proved fundamental to the success of our ventures. More than professional growth, what changed was our relationship. Gradually, he stopped seeing me only as his daughter's husband and came to consider me a real part of his family. He began to treat me as the son he never had, and the feeling was mutual. At family gatherings, he would make a point of talking about our accomplishments in the company, always with pride, as if we were an unbeatable team. There was a camaraderie between us that had once seemed impossible. I remember one particular moment, a few years later, when we were celebrating his birthday. During dinner, after a few glasses of wine, he stood up to make a small speech. He started talking about his journey, about how proud he was of the family he had built, and then turned to me. He said that for many years, he thought he already had everything he needed, but that upon getting to know me better, he realized there was still room for something more, a father-son relationship. He said, with a choked voice, that he considered me the son he never had and that, more than ever, he felt grateful to have someone like me by his and his daughter's side. That moment was indescribably emotional. Knowing that the man who once looked at me with disdain now saw me as his son was proof that all our differences had been overcome. I raised my glass, thanked him for his words, and said that, to me, he was also the father I always wanted, someone who over time not only inspired me, but taught me values about family, resilience, and hard work that I would carry for the rest of my life. From then on, the relationship we had became even closer. He became my confidant, the person with whom I discussed plans for the company's future, and more importantly, someone I knew I could count on unconditionally. And although the journey up to that point hadn't been easy, every challenge and disagreement contributed to bringing us to where we were, not just as father-in-law and son-in-law, but as father and son, building something far greater than we had imagined together. The years passed, and my relationship with my father-in-law strengthened in a way I could never have anticipated. He became a true father to me, someone who not only taught me about construction and business, but also about the value of family, mutual respect, and humility. We had built a unique relationship, something I knew I would carry with me forever. That's why, when he became ill, it caught me by surprise. It was hard to imagine that strong, energetic man, always willing to work and learn, suddenly so fragile and vulnerable. He was diagnosed with a serious illness, and the impact was devastating for all of us. My wife was heartbroken, and I, though trying to stay strong, often found myself alone, struggling to process the reality. During his last months, I made a point to be by his side whenever possible. I visited the hospital almost every day, bringing our favorite coffee and spending hours talking. Sometimes we talked about the company, how we were handling new challenges, and he always tried to offer some advice, even with his weak voice. Other times, we talked about simple things, family trip memories, stories from my wife's childhood, or the dreams he had for the future. It was on one of those days, shortly before he passed, that he called me for a conversation I will never forget. He seemed especially thoughtful and asked me to sit beside the bed. With difficulty, he held my hand and looked me in the eyes. His eyes were teary, but there was a calmness and sincerity that struck me deeply. "I want to ask for your forgiveness," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to ask forgiveness for everything I thought about you at the beginning. I was stubborn, proud, and I didn't see the incredible man you were. You showed me that I was wrong, and not just about your abilities or your work. You taught me what true humanity is." I was speechless for a moment. Those words came from a deep place, from someone who, for so long, had been a role model to me. I squeezed his hand, feeling the emotion rise in my chest, and tried to respond, but he continued before I could say anything. "I want you to know that I love you like a son. You were a son to me, and I will never be able to thank you enough for what you did for me and my family." Tears streamed down my face. And in that moment, I realized that all the differences we once had were insignificant compared to what we had built together. I told him that I loved him too, that he had been the father I never had, and that I would always do my best to honor his memory and take care of the family he loved so much. Shortly afterward, he passed away. The impact of his death was profound and painful. Even expecting the inevitable, nothing prepared me for that moment. The void he left was immense, and the days that followed were difficult. My wife and I leaned on each other, trying to fill the gap his absence had left. The pain was different for each of us, but there was something that united us: the love and respect we both felt for that man. My wife always told me how much she loved the way I treated her father. She said that was largely why our relationship was so strong, because she knew I loved and respected her father, and that reflected the kind of person I was. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's precisely because we built that mutual respect and admiration that our love became so solid, like a well-founded house that can withstand storms. Even now, years later, I still miss him, I miss our conversations, his advice, the way he laughed when we shared something funny that happened at work. But more than anything, I miss the father he became to me, the one I never had but finally found at a time in my life when I didn't even know I needed it. But I know he left me much more than just longing. He taught me what it means to be a father, what it means to be a true man. With him, I learned about patience, humility, and unconditional love. These lessons are something I intend to carry forward, and I know he would want it that way. That's why, when I think about the children my wife and I plan to have, the grandchildren he so much wanted to meet, I promise myself that I will give them the best father in the world. Not because I am perfect, but because I learned from the best example I could have had. My mission now is to ensure that his legacy lives on, that his grandchildren know their grandfather not only through stories, but through the values he taught us. I want them to know how much he was respected and loved, how much he was an essential part of what we are today. And above all, I want them to feel the love he had for family, which was so great that it overflowed to everyone around him. With that mission in mind, I move forward. The longing never goes away, but each day I turn it into strength to be a present father, a dedicated husband, and a man worthy of the respect he had for me. And so, in a quiet and loving way, he continues to live in everything we do, in every brick we lay, in every dream we build together.